morning, good evening, and good afternoon. First, an update on the global monkeypox outbreak. More than 35,000 cases of monkeypox have now been reported to WHO from 92 countries and territories, with 12 deaths. Almost 7,500 cases were reported last week, a 20% increase over the previous week, which was also 20% more than the week before. Almost all cases are being reported from Europe and the Americas, and almost all cases continue to be reported among men who have sex with men, underscoring the importance for all countries to design and deliver services and information tailored to these communities that protect health, human rights, and dignity. The primary focus for all countries must be to ensure they are ready for monkeypox and to stop transmission using effective public health tools, including enhanced disease surveillance, careful contact tracing, tailored risk communication, and community engagement, and risk reduction measures. Vaccines may also play an important part in controlling the outbreak, and in many countries, there is high demand for vaccines from the affected communities. However, for the moment, supplies of vaccines and data about their effectiveness are limited, although we are starting to receive data from some countries. WHO has been in close contact with the manufacturers of vaccines and with countries and organizations who are willing to share doses. We remain concerned that the inequitable access to vaccines we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic will be repeated, and that the poorest will continue to be left behind. As we announced last week, a meeting of experts convened by WHO has agreed to rename the 2 known clades of monkeypox virus using Roman numerals. The clade formerly known as the Congo Basin or Central African clade will now be referred to as clade 1, while the West African clade will be called clade 2. Work on renaming the disease and the virus is ongoing. Now to the Greater Horn of Africa, where millions of people are facing starvation and disease in Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Uganda. Drought, conflict, climate change, and increasing prices for food, fuel, and fertilizer are all contributing to lack of access to sufficient food. Hunger and malnutrition pose a direct threat to health, but they also weaken the body's defenses and open the door to diseases including pneumonia, measles, and cholera. Food insecurity also forces some people to choose between paying for food and health care. Many people are migrating in search of food, which can also put them at increased risk of disease and reduced access to health services. While other partners are working to address the food crisis, WHO is addressing the resulting health crisis. We have already released more than $16 million from the WHO Contingency Fund for emergencies, but more is needed. The $123.7 million we are appealing for will be used to prevent and control outbreaks, to treat malnutrition, and to provide essential health services and medicines. In the Ethiopian region of Tigray, the drought is compounding a man-made catastrophe for 6 million people who have been under siege from Ethiopian and Eritrean forces for 21 months, sealed off from the outside world with no telecommunications, no banking services, no electricity, and limited fuel. As a result, the people of Tigray are facing multiple outbreaks of malaria, anthrax, cholera, diarrhea, and more. This unimaginable cruelty must end. The only solution is peace. Earlier this month, a delegation from the US, European Union, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Canada visited Tigray in an effort to facilitate peace talks. Following their visit, the US and EU issued a joint statement saying that swift restoration of electricity, telecommunications, banking, and other basic services in Tigray is essential for peace talks to go forward. So far, the government has refused. Since the humanitarian truce was announced in late March, some humanitarian aid has been delivered to Tigray, although nowhere near enough. In addition, the shortage of fuel and cash continues to be a major impediment to the distribution of aid and to WHO's efforts to respond to outbreaks, provide vaccination against COVID and other vaccines, and deliver other life-saving services. Finally, on COVID-19. Over the past 4 weeks, reported deaths globally have increased by 35%. Just in the past week, 15,000 people around the world lost their lives to COVID-19. 15,000 deaths a week is completely unacceptable. When we have all the tools to prevent infections and save lives. We're all tired of this virus and tired of the pandemic, but the virus is not tired of us. Omicron remains the dominant variant, with the BA.5 subvariant representing more than 90% of sequences shared in the last month. However, the number of sequences shared per week has fallen by 90% since the beginning of this year, and the number of countries sharing sequences has dropped by 75%, making it so much harder to understand how the virus might be changing. With colder weather approaching in the Northern Hemisphere and people spending more time indoors, the risks for more intense transmission and hospitalization will only increase in the coming months, not only for COVID-19, but for other diseases, including influenza. But none of us is helpless. Please get vaccinated if you're not, and if you need a booster, get one. Wear a mask when you can't distance, and try to avoid crowds, especially indoors. There is a lot of talk about learning to live with this virus, but we cannot live with 15,000 deaths a week. We cannot live with mounting hospitalizations and deaths. We cannot live with inequitable access to vaccines and other tools. Learning to live with COVID-19 does not mean we pretend it's not there. It means we use the tools we have to protect ourselves and protect others.
I was wondering if you had seen reports today that Bavarian Nordic is unlikely to meet demand for monkeypox doses. I know you have expressed concern on this, but I was wondering if you had anything else to say. Should the company explore partnerships with other companies? Should they do tech transfer? Should more manufacturers be called in? Are there any other vaccines that we should be looking at to respond to the monkeypox outbreak? And more broadly, given this resurgence of quote-unquote old diseases, such as polio or even monkeypox, is there a broad theme in why this is happening? Is this climate change? Is this global populations performing better surveillance? Is it a long tail effect of the pandemic on population immunity? I appreciate it's a broad question, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
It's actually WHO is in touch with Bavarian Nordic specifically, but also with the other manufacturers, first to ensure to understand supply and the hurdles to increase manufacturing capacity and availability of this, of therapeutics and also of vaccines. And second, to discuss potential opportunities for technology transfer and voluntary licensing of this technology. So, and we are talking about this in the context where we do need more data about both vaccines and the therapeutics. So this is work ongoing, and we were happy to update as we get more information and the negotiations with these manufacturers continue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, we have seen in the recent past a lot of disease emerging and others re-emerging, and I think it's important to differentiate the two phenomena. For emergence is something that we know most of the emerging viruses are coming from animals. This is the case for monkeypox, and they infect human. So at the beginning, it's only sporadic cases, but if the virus find the right environment, then it can evolve and become more fit for human, and then you can see localized transmission and further amplification, again, if the conditions are supportive for that, like high human density, very close contact, then you can have outbreak. And this is what we have seen with monkeypox. Initially it was in animals, then it went to some humans, and then we had localized outbreak, and now we have a multi-country outbreak. This is for the emergence, and of course there are many factors driving the emergence. You mentioned some of them, the climate change, but also human density in certain populations, certain human behavior can also foster this amplification. And also what is really important is the fact that we can stop those outbreaks at the source, but for this we need a very good health system, very good collaboration with the One Health approach, and so that's why it's so important to strengthen universal health coverage and primary health care, because this is why and we can then stop those outbreaks at source with a good surveillance, good healthcare system, and stop the spread when outbreaks are still localized. For the re-emergence, sometimes there are other factors playing out, and in particular for disease for which we do have tools for the control, like polio, like measles. The fact is that it's often because the vaccine coverage is too low that those diseases re-emerge. And it's very important to understand that vaccine coverage is a very, very important indicator of the protection of human beings against those diseases. And it's very important, therefore, to make sure that all children get access to these vaccines in due time, so that we can make sure that there is no cohort of human beings that are unprotected. And we have the tools, but we need to use them. And this is what is really important to prevent re-emergence.
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my question. Just curious if there were any updates as far as mutations in the monkeypox virus. I believe CDC officials had said a month or two ago that they had seen at least 2 different strains. Curious if there's any update. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do continue to monitor the strains that are reported through genome sequencing that is put in accessible websites where scientists, evolutionary biologists, and pox virologists can look and review. So we have seen some mutations, but at the moment we don't have any information really on what that means in terms of the behavior of the virus itself or how it interacts with the human immune response. We'll continue to monitor that space.
Thank you for taking my question, Tarek. In the Director General's opening remarks, he mentioned that some countries are starting to provide WHO with some evidence about the efficacy of the monkeypox vaccines. Could somebody please elaborate on what is being seen? Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. We don't have any randomized controlled trials of these studies in the context of this particular outbreak, so we don't have direct clinical efficacy studies, as I say, in the context of this monkeypox outbreak at the moment. What we are beginning to see is some observational studies reporting, for example, persons who may have had post-exposure prophylaxis after being exposed to monkeypox, they may have had the vaccine. Again, just a couple of reports are coming out, and we have known from the beginning that this vaccine would not be a silver bullet, that it would not meet all the expectations that are being put on it, and that we don't have firm efficacy data or effectiveness data in this context. So what we are beginning to see is that some cases are being reported perhaps as breakthrough cases, either following post-exposure prophylaxis, which is meant to reduce disease severity, or following preventive vaccination, which is meant to, of course, reduce infection. And we don't yet have any as I say, randomized control trials specifically on that. But the fact that we're beginning to see some breakthrough cases is also really important information because it tells us that the vaccine is not 100% effective in any given circumstance, whether preventive or post-exposure. We cannot expect 100% effectiveness at the moment based on this emerging information. So again, this is not new. In the past, based on a very limited study from the 1980s, it was already suggested that the smallpox vaccines in use at that time, which were also powerful replicating vaccines, might offer about 85% protection against monkeypox, and that was really one study in an area where some people were vaccinated and some people were not, so they could compare that. However, that's really all the information we had, and the vaccines we have now are developed in order to be safer, but they're also non-replicating. So we are not expecting 100% efficacy for these vaccines for the prevention of monkeypox. We don't know the exact information. What we're seeing are breakthrough cases, which are not really surprises, but it reminds us that vaccine is not a silver bullet, that every person who feels that they are at risk and appreciates their own level of risk and wishes to lower their own level of risk have many interventions at their disposal, which includes vaccination where available, but also includes protection from activities where they may be at risk, reducing number of sex partners, avoiding group sex or casual sex, and specifically when a vaccine is in fact administered, waiting until that vaccine has the time to produce a maximum immune response. In the case of MVA vaccine, this is 2 weeks after the second dose. So again, it's not a magic bullet. People do need to wait until the vaccine can generate a maximum immune response, but we don't yet know what the effectiveness will be overall.
First, regarding Brazil, when we see the WHO dashboard for monkeypox confirmed cases, Brazil is already the 5th country in the world. So it seems the disease is spreading much faster in Brazil. Am I wrong? And how do you explain this quick spread of the virus in Brazil? And the second is, if you could comment on the first possible case of human-to-dog transmission of monkeypox. Is it a surprise? What are the precautions to avoid this kind of transmission? And what are the risks for pets? Thanks a lot.
Sure, thank you very much, Bianca. Yes, a number of countries are showing concerning trends, and Brazil is one of them. The number of cases does continue to rise, and it's really important for all public health interventions that are available in the country to be put in place and for individuals to be given the information they need to protect themselves. And WHO, both the headquarters, of course, and the regional office with the Pan American Health Organization are there to support the country, and the country office is also there to support Brazil. It's really important that Brazil have a strong response in terms of information. Remember, our strategic imperatives for this response are information, action, and evidence. So people who are at risk in Brazil, as everywhere else, need the information that they need to protect themselves by knowing what types of settings and which types of activities may put them at risk. Action in terms of public health response, engaging with communities is one very strong action, engaging with affected groups, and of course collecting the evidence on what works and what works less well. So this is what's critical for Brazil right now, as access to other countermeasures is, of course, being worked on and scaled up as soon as possible. Regarding the incident of the dog, yes, so this is the first case reported of human-to-animal transmission. This has not been reported before, and we believe it is the first instance of a canine being infected. However, this has been a theoretical risk. You may see that a number of public health agencies have advised those who contract monkeypox to make every effort to isolate from their pets or to isolate their pets from themselves because of this hypothetical risk, particularly both in the household for domestic pets as well as in possible risks of contamination of animals outside the household. For example, rodents accessing garbage and things like that. So waste management is critical, isolation is important. These are some of the lessons that have been, some of the messages that have been given on a precautionary basis to avoid contamination, infection of pets, and to avoid possible spread of the virus into other animal populations in countries where this has not occurred before. So while these have been hypothetical, theoretical risks all along, we believe that they are important enough to have this as part of the response, that people should have information on how to protect their pets as well as how to manage their waste so that animals in general are not exposed to the monkeypox virus.
You mentioned that there are more than 75,000 cases reported to the WHO. Are those confirmed cases, or they include suspected cases as well? And my second question is, you said that the outbreak in non-endemic countries is still concentrated in men who have sex with men. Is there evidence in any of those countries that it is spilling over to the general population in significant numbers?
So the report we have today is over 35,000 cases, not 75,000. So just for clarity, 35,000 cases in 92 countries reported to date. These are confirmed cases. WHO reports confirmed and probable cases. There are, of course, other situations where suspected cases are reported, but may not have had the ability, access to testing or the ability for laboratory confirmation. So 35,000 are confirmed cases. Regarding the, sorry, I've forgotten the second question. Oh, the spillover, thank you. So regarding the outbreak in men who have sex with men and whether it's affecting other communities and other groups, yes, we are seeing, of course, sporadic cases in men who are not self-reporting as gay or bisexual, who are otherwise also reporting as heterosexual where the information is available, in some women, in other groups of people who have a larger number of sexual partners, and in some cases in children, some of whom are adolescents, age 15, 16, 17, who may also be engaged in sexual activities, and then a small number of cases in children under the age of 10 or under the age of 5. At the moment, these remain sporadic cases. There does not appear to be extended transmission from those within their own peer groups. And so this is in a very important space that we watch very closely, and important for everyone to realize that even though the outbreak is spreading in men who have sex with men, and this is our primary group that we concerned should receive the information they need to protect themselves, it is also important that, yes, anyone who is in close contact with someone who has monkeypox can also be exposed, whether in the household setting or in the occupational setting. We do have some new information there, and also in other settings where people may have multiple sexual partners. So thanks for the information, for the question. We are still monitoring that very closely.
So FIND came up with a database of monkeypox diagnostics, but mentioned that they are not testing the specificity or sensitivity of those. So is WHO planning to commission any studies to examine the quality of these, especially rapid diagnostic kits or any novel diagnostics? So that's the first question. The second one, how does WHO compare any sort of latest developments in monkeypox diagnostics between high-income and low-income countries, especially with respect to ensuring equitable access? Thank you.
I can start. So for the diagnostics, our laboratory teams here in headquarters, as well as in all the regions and countries around the world, are working very hard to bring a diagnostic capacity to countries, particularly lower and middle income countries that need support in accessing diagnostics. So this primarily at the moment remains PCR. There are some commercial entities that have been validated through a WHO process and therefore recommended for direct procurement and or support to countries directly so that they have the test kits necessary to do the PCR testing. At the moment, there is not yet a validated, to my knowledge, a validated rapid test which is also a space that we are monitoring on an ongoing basis. And WHO would certainly be engaged in validating rapid tests if they become available. We know that a number of entities, whether academic or commercial, are working in this area, and so we will continue to monitor that and bring information to you when we have it. Regarding the latest developments in high and low-income countries, I believe that question was about access. So I will refer to Dr. Mariangela. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Vijay, and I think you covered most of it, Rosamund. But just to add that, of course, access in low and middle-income countries is a very reasonable concern for all of us, and we are working, as Rosamund just mentioned, with developers and organizations that work with manufacturers to develop new technologies, including, and most importantly, for the rapid diagnostic tests that you mentioned, to be developed and be available at affordable prices for the developing world. So this is work in progress at the moment.
I just wanted to go back to Bianca's question on the case of the dog who's infected by humans. Just if you could say a little bit more about what the main concern would be about that. If it's the fact that the virus can spread further, if it's spreading in animals and humans at the same time, or if you're concerned that we'll see more dangerous mutations, perhaps if the virus is spreading in different species. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Nina. So first of all, the concern is, of course, for the household where infection may be occurring. We're not talking about this particular case, of course. We're talking about households in general. There are other members of the household, adults, children, and pets. And so obviously the concern is to prevent infection of any member of the household and, of course, prevent onward infection from any member of the household to any other member of the household, which we have seen happen in other outbreaks in the past. So protecting members of the household through isolation, through regular cleaning, these are all important strategies and tactics to help for people to protect the ones that they are closest to, their loved ones in their homes as well as in their communities. Regarding movement of the virus into an animal population outside the household, certainly as soon as the virus moves into a different setting in a different population, there is obviously a possibility that it will develop differently and mutate differently. That's a theoretical possibility. Right now, we don't have information on that because we don't have any reports. We are working closely with the World Organization for Animal Health, and they also have Q&A on their website, and we do work with them on these issues to bring attention for those who are working in this space.
And Sylvia, making the same point that I'm about to make. It's just, again, in terms of caution, clearly, in this particular case, with the transmission to a dog in a closed domestic setting, with having one animal infected is not unusual. It's not unexpected that would happen. What we don't want to see happen is disease moving from one species to the next and then remaining in that species as a species, moving around within a new species, because that's when a virus can adapt to that new species. And in adapting to that new species, it is incentivized to evolve as such. We see this, and this is probably the more dangerous situations, as we've seen in other situations, is where a virus can move into a small mammal population with high density of animals, and then it is through the transmission between one to the next to the other animal, and it's through that process of one animal infecting the next and the next and the next that you see rapid evolution in the virus. So it's usually amongst those smaller mammals where you see a virus being able to move quickly in a dense population, and then the virus evolves very quickly. I don't expect the virus to evolve any more quickly in one single dog than in one single human. So in that sense, in this particular situation, this particular animal is the member of a human family and is just an animal unfortunately exposed to the virus. And in that sense, we want to make sure that anybody around a person, a case, that you don't infect people in the household with you, you don't infect animals in the household with you, that can be avoided. So having that normal precaution of not infecting humans or animals around you is very important, and but not to become overly concerned in general and for people out there, pets are not at risk in the same way as most of the general population are not at risk of contracting monkeypox. We need to remain vigilant. We need to remain cautious. But at the same time, animals and pets do not represent a risk to people right now. It is important, and it is to be commended when people who have animals either try to protect those animals, or if those animals become sick or become infected themselves, that they seek care for those animals, as has happened in this case. So those individuals are commended for the action they've taken. So in that sense, I think it's important that we don't allow these viruses to establish themselves in other animal populations. Single exposures or single infections in particular animals is not unexpected, however. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. To complement a bit, we have seen those infection in the past with other zoonotic viruses where they contaminate a new species, but usually it's a dead end. I mean, it stopped there because the virus is not very fit for this species, and so sometimes it's only stopped there, and it's just one case. So here, what is interesting, as Rosamund mentioned, is that we never had those kind of reports, so it's the first time. It means that a dog can be infected, but it doesn't mean that a dog can transmit the disease and infect other dogs, nor does it mean that the dog can reinfect human if it is infected. So I think what we try to really here to give as a message is what we need is to be cautious, as Mike said, vigilant, and prevent further transmission, because those viruses, the more they transmit, the more they can evolve. And every time they invest or infect a new species, they can acquire different properties and then evolve. So it's very important just to monitor the situation and all together be vigilant and prevent further transmission. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to follow up with a question on the monkeypox vaccine. Earlier you were talking about breakthrough infections. I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little bit on how many doses those people who had breakthrough infection had before they had a breakthrough infection, and also could you provide an early estimate in terms of how often this has happened? Thank you.
The first part of the question, I don't think we're going to discuss individual studies here today. As that information continues to come in, we are monitoring it extremely closely. What we would like to see is some randomized control trials, wherever that may still be feasible, and supporting countries to do that, and also some observational studies wherever vaccine is being rolled out. There are different study designs that can also be attempted to support what information we can collect in the context of the rollout of the vaccines. And we do expect to have this type of information coming out, which does not give us the whole answer because they're not randomized controlled trials. And over time, we will need to triangulate all that information to see what are the best estimates we can come up with.
On monkeypox, in Mexico, the cases have doubled in a week. They are not doing tests. And on the website of the health secretary, of the health minister, there is no clear information, nor are men warned that they have sex with men. And, you know, there's no warning at all for men that have sex with men. So about vaccines, there are no vaccines. So I would like to know your comments, to hear your comments on the situation and what could happen in Mexico if this continues like this. And second, if you allow me another question on Ukraine, if you can comment on the Russian attacks against the Zaporizhia, I don't know how to pronounce it, the nuclear plant, the dangers to which the population are being exposed. There may be a catastrophe there. So I would like to hear your comments, your concerns, and if you communicated with the Russian government on this matter. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we will follow up directly on Mexico. This message is for all countries. Countries need to obviously take monkeypox seriously. I'm not aware of the specific issues you referred to in Mexico, but we will follow up through our Pan American Health Organization, our American regional office in Washington, and engage with the government in Mexico. My understanding is the government of Mexico do take this epidemic seriously, and are taking action. But we will take up your concerns with them and be assured of that. I am glad to take your second question on Ukraine. I'm glad somebody asked a question about somewhere else. I was quite surprised. I know this is quite a specialist group, but it's interesting to be asked questions only about monkeypox, even though we have 15,000 deaths from COVID and we have a massive drought and a massive famine emerging in the Horn of Africa. And yet all of the questions relate to monkeypox, which shows how much interest there is in monkeypox. But it also shows, quite frankly, how interest is declining in COVID and how really no one seems to give a damn about what's happening in the Horn of Africa. With regard to Ukraine, we have been involved since the very beginning with the authorities in Ukraine and through the IEA and the REM-Plan initiative in order to be ready to respond to any radionuclear incident that might occur. We have been, and the Director General is on the record, stating his concerns regarding the possibility of any form of radionuclear accident in or around one of the existing nuclear plants. We're in constant communication with the IAEA and remain ready as a member of the UN system to react if there's a need to react. A nuclear accident obviously would be catastrophic in this situation to human life and to the environment. So we do remain concerned about that, but we are guided by our colleagues at the IAEA and will continue to offer medical response support to them and to the government of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq, for taking my question. This is Simon Ateba with Today News Africa in Washington, D.C. The U.S. CDC is ending recommendations for social distancing and quarantine for COVID-19 control and no longer recommend tests to stay in schools. I was wondering if you could react. As people get tired of these very strict public health measures and we learn to live with COVID-19 with vaccine and therapeutics, is this something that the WHO will also recommend soon? And on Tigray, the US government said last week that things seem to have been going very smoothly since the humanitarian ceasefire in March. But Dr. Tedros just said that things seem to still be very difficult and help is not reaching people in need. Can you please talk a little bit more about the situation there and hunger in the Horn of Africa in general? Thank you.
The main question that Mike alluded and the DG said in his speech that the idea that we can live with a virus that just killed 15,000 last week, it's something that we can still struggle and wrapping around it. Yes, we are tired of it. The public is tired of it. Even us, we are tired of it. But the virus is not tired of us. And every day is bringing new tricks and its sleeve. Over 200 Omicron subvariants are recorded. Some of them are gaining more momentum. So there are a lot of the things the population can withstand. I think the resilience of the communities, if risk is explained very well, can be done. So every member state has to do risk mitigation and look at the national level. So we are aware about the US CDC's guidelines and how they will be handled at the national. But on the other side, we have in the same US, we have last week alone almost 100,000 population hospitalized, 500 deaths a day. That's 3,500 a week. It's almost one of the leading cause of death in the US. On the other side of the world, Japan, Pacific Islands, for the first time I struggle. Multiple countries are struggling. Sadly, we are still in the midst of the pandemic and every wave is kind of starting again. We need to come together to resolve. It's not pandemic is once in a lifetime, and it's not a switch on and off that someone can decide this is today what we require. What we have been calling is really simple, basic measures that are cost savings. We need to share them equally. And even in the richest country, the people who are suffering will be the low middle income countries, the marginalized, the ethnic minorities who don't have the luxury of getting some of the recommendations. So to sum it up, WHO has always called a risk-based approach to use data to make the decision at the lowest level, because a big country cannot make a decision for that. So that's our main recommendation. We just updated our guidance in quarantine, in isolation, in surveillance, which are all leading to it to find the balance. One is to suppress the transmission or to control the transmission while also reducing the morbidity and the mortality, taking into consideration the socio-economic and the fatigue of the communities. So our message has remained really the same, is we have the tools, we need to share them equally, we need to explain to the people that pandemic are once in a lifetime and not a small epidemics that you can come out of it. Thank you.
Tigray and Greater Horn of Africa. And the situation in Tigray clearly is still very, very difficult. We are talking about blockade for more than 2 years, and still access to fuel for humanitarian workers is a big challenge. Humanitarian actors need 2 million liters a month, and since April 1st, they have received less than 2 million liters. So, and the supply of medicine is still very challenging for WHO and partners. We have big delays because of the permit authorization to supply, in Tigray. And if you look at the level of disruption and lack of access to health services where health workers were not paid, it will take months and months for the system to recover. In the meantime, we have already lost so many people, so the recovery will take very, very long. And we are not even yet filling all the needs, even to talk about recovery, making sure that we have full access and the supply is permitted without any restriction will be extremely important. And if you look at functionality of health services and reporting, we have seen now around 50% of the health facility reporting, meaning that even to be able to detect and respond to outbreak is very limited. The situation is, has been exacerbated by the situation in the Greater Horn of Africa. Today we are talking about more than 20 million people in Ethiopia that need support for humanitarian needs. If you look at the Horn of Africa, the total population is close to 200 million, but we already have 80 million people in a very acute food insecurity situation. And when you talk about food crisis, we are already in a health crisis because of the many reasons already explained by Dr. Tedros in the opening. So we have seen so many outbreaks of cholera, measles, malaria, meningitis in so many countries. In addition to that, the lack of access to primary health care because of the number of internally displaced population. We are talking about 11 million population now displaced and 4.2 million refugees. So, and WHO is looking for $124 million to cover the health needs. So far, we are only covering 12% of the need, and mainly from the WHO Contingency Fund for Emergencies, thanks to our partners for the support. But we need much more in a bigger scale and very rapidly if you don't want to lose millions of children and millions of population. Thank you.
There's a significant amount of debate and questions online regarding how exactly it transmits. Is it airborne? Is it, you get it from a clothing store? And amidst all of that, there's actually so much misinformation circulating as well. How concerned is the WHO regarding a level of misinformation around monkeypox, much as we've seen with other illnesses and diseases? And do you have any strategies to sort of combat what is a rather rampant amount of information circulating these days?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Lauren, for this question. Indeed, I think we have seen that every epidemic or pandemic is accompanied by this misinformation. So it's not new. It's just what makes it more difficult probably to combat is the fact that now a lot of the population of the world is connected and it's spread through social media. And so it spread faster and further than what we had observed before. So WHO is concerned by this because this misinformation first can really hamper the response to the outbreak because people can maybe take some treatment that are presented as miraculous, but in reality they are not treating them and could be poisoned, or they can maybe refuse the vaccine that can save their life. So the impact of misinformation on people's behavior is really concerning. learning. And that's why WHO is really doing a lot of effort to combat it. What we do exactly, first we listen on social media what are the concerns of the people so that we can provide them with the right information at the right time and the right format. And this social listening is extremely important to first understand what kind of information is needed. The second thing we do, we also work very closely with the communities, and in particular for this particular outbreak of monkeypox, as you know, because men having sex with men, it seems to be the communities that is currently the most affected. It's very important to reach out to this community and having direct discussion with them and trying to understand how we can support them in preventing them to be infected. And so we have here a department for HIV and sexually transmitted disease, and so they have been extremely helpful to discuss with these communities and provide them with the information that they could need to prevent the transmission. Then what we do, we also identify the places where people might be exposed and have a specific information during those situations. For instance, there was at the beginning some amplifying events such as a big mass gathering. So it's important to work also with the people organizing those mass gatherings and people attending those mass gatherings so that the right information can be discussed at this meeting. And of course, there is a lot of work done, but this is not specific for monkeypox. It has been done also for COVID-19 with the social media platform to try to triage and select the information that is pertinent and accurate so that people can have access to this information more easily and or have the tools to understand if an information is accurate or not and support them in acquiring not only this health literacy but also this digital literacy where they can grow their capacities to differentiate misinformation from accurate information. And so this is a whole program of work because we think that this is one of the main challenges that we are facing in the 21st century. The science has made fantastic progress. We have access to vaccine, to therapeutics, and really it's really concerning if people cannot have access to this progress of medicine because of misinformation. And I think we have all a role to play. I think journalists in particular, you are really important messenger and really important trusted sources of information for the population, and it's very important that we all see this as our collective responsibility to make sure that people have access to the right information at the right time in the right format. Thank you.
Lalela ngikutshela tindzaba letibiye Nkosini. Uthokandaba, tinvombi, imbali yemaswati ayiphelele esigodlweni eluthithini. Mhla tinge-30 kuyo ingci, tiyawufike tibhalise ngalelo langa. Mhla tinge-31 tiyaphuma. Mhla lulunye enyonini tiyageca. Mhla 2 kuyo inyoni tiyabuya. Mhla 3 kuyo inyoni tiyaphumula. Mhla 4 enyonini tiyachitha. Mhla 5 kuyo inyoni tiyagidza. Umyalo etikhulwini. Kuleso naleso sikhulu kubhekeke ukuthi sikhiphe emajaha lamane. kuze kuthi nakukhona kungaphili kwamunye webantfwana, mabili emajaha akhone kubikela labo labafanele. Tikhulu tifanele tiyale tintfombi nemajaha lachube yona imbali nakuphuma emphakatsini. Emajaha ayatiswa kutsi tintfombi titawulala todvwa nemajaha alale odwa. Usho njalo ke Mswazi omnyama kulabantu lodukandaba wasemmelebeleni. Sisho njalo ke Sigudhu sasimnyama siyesebeka. Usho ke njalo ke lwandle olukhulu liyadikisela. Bethe unowaphakathi wena ungangezintaba. Lokhipa simemetelo indvuna yetinfombi nonduduzo zuzu zubuko. Ninebe kunene. Tinfombi imbali yamaswati iyatiswa kutsi ayingeti netunele tekubolekwa, ayinge makeup, ayinga rouge. Boba betikhulu bayatiswa kutsi abayalisise kahle bantfu lababukile kutsi bangadzinji mati bashayela ibutho nakwentekile lokho nalo lilahlekile. Tinsatheli tekhaya tangaphandle tiyayana ukuthi atithathisise kahle ngaphambi kokuthi tibhale. Bethe unowaphakathi.
Lesi sikhathi lapho khona emaphoyisa agubha kuba khona kwawo even.
Kulapho kukhuthathwa khona sive ukuthi sike sihlale phansi sibuke bumcoka bemaphoyisa empilweni yebantfu. Siphindze sibuke tindlela letinsha tekuphepha kubo bonke bucala lobuveta sihloko. Sive sakangwane siyakhunjutwa ukuthi singawafaki emaphoyisa etinkulumeni tepolitiki ngoba liphoyisa alingeni futhi alingenelani nepolitiki. Emaphoyisa alwa nebucala netingoti temgwaco kuphela nje. Ingako emaphoyisa athi wonke umuntu eveni akahlale ngaphandle kwekunceneka ukuthi angahle ahlaselwe tilwane tasendle. Umuntu lohlala Eswatini akatiphilele atisebentele ngaphandle kwekwesaba kuhlaselwa, kwemucwa nekucekelwa phansi kwembahla yakhe. Nawe wena lophathekile, emaphoyisa athi digulele kahle uze uphile ngaphandle kwekuphatamiseka. Lokungenteka ngekuthi tidlova tingene tihlasele labo labakunakekelako kuleyo ndlu. Sive lesihlakaniphile nguleso lesiphakamisa kusebenta kwemaphoyisa nabo bonke labalwa nebucala. Ngale kwaloko timbungushe tiyawuwangenela emazinyane kungenamuntu ekhaya.
Lo mlayeto niulethelwa ngemaphoyisa embube abambisene nomsakato wetithombe.
Using an ATM is a simple process. You simply insert your card, punch in your PIN, and withdraw your cash. However, this simple process can open up you and your finances to some dangers. So it is very important that you proceed with caution when using the ATM and never share your PIN. When approaching the ATM, it is very important that you have your card ready, either in your hand or in your pocket, so that you do not waste time going through your belongings, either your wallet or your handbag, as this will give opportunities for thieves to act. Thirdly, put your money away immediately. Don't give anyone an opportunity to grab your cash or your card after a withdrawal. Lastly, always take your receipt after each and every transaction. It is important that you get your sleep after every transaction because it contains crucial information about your balances, and that may lead you to be a victim of bolandela. Be cyber aware, be cyber smart.
Nene bekunene kusetandleni tesive kuthi imimango ingagcini kukampunzi edla emini sive sakangwane nebantu labakhethe kuhlala Eswatini abaphile ngekukhululeka nekuthi kubethe lo nyathelo lilungelo lalabanye egameni lekufuna lilungelo lakhe sive asikhumbule ukuthi emaphoyisa bomake nabobabe labatinikele kwenta siqiniseko ukuthi wonke umuntu lonempahla yakhe ingacekelwa phansi ngulomunye wonke umuntu akahlale ngekuthula nangaphandle kokwesaba tintwe letingatiwa emaphoyisa ngekulandzela nekushiqilela umthetho athi into yemuntu ayibe ngeyakhe umuntu sive asijinge siwabambise siphinde siwasekele emaphoyisa emsebentini wawo kude emalungelo aso sive osomabhizinisi kanye nebantu labasebentako anganyatseleki khona-ke imimango itawukwakha nemakhaya akhulise bantwana ngaso sandla lesiya emlonyeni emaphoyisa naso sive abasebente ngebudlelwane nangekubambisana kulwa nebucala netingoti temgwaco.
Using an ATM is a simple process. You insert your card, punch in your PIN, and withdraw your money. However, this simple task can open you and your finances up to certain dangers if you are not careful. Always exercise caution whenever you are transacting at an ATM machine. Always use an ATM during daylight hours. Robberies are far more likely to happen during the night when fewer people surround that ATM location. However, if you have to use an ATM during the night, you need to choose a machine in a well-lit public area. Avoid using ATM located in isolated or obscured areas. Robberies are far more likely to happen in remote areas where the ATM is covered by shadows or other structures. You should avoid such environment since lesser people can witness any criminal activity taking place. Make sure that all the lights on the ATM are working. If ever you find an ATM with faulty lights or other visibly broken features, you need to avoid using that machine. Be cyber aware, be cyber smart. Transact with caution.
Anguvusele mbukelo welihlelo kungumsombuluko yebo kungumvulo sivukela kakhona itinzawo ngokwahlukahlukana imidolobha yethu nemigwaqo lemikhulu sesihlolile siyakupha nje simo ngalokufinyetiwe lapha eTulu ehekeni laseNgwenya na usuka khona emotshane ubheka khona lapha kunaye itraffic circle lapha eNgwenya asivetele ukuthi kunelidlendwe lemaloli lelithetheke umzila longasenqele lekwenda ke ukuthi bashayeli bakhuthathwe ukuthi abagcine sekudla kulandzela ukuthi lawa maloli asamile ke kusalungiselela wona ke kuyawungena khona lapha egedeni akhona ke amaphoyisa kwenda siqiniseko sokuthi siyawendlula ngendlela leyo bangileyo lephephile kanti ekhathi edolobheni laseMbabane iba netemgwaqo lethu lapha eMangwaneni na uphuma solo atisebenzi sikhuthaza nje bona abashayeli ukuthi abakhumbule phela ukuthi kunedimotolo lesingenelako kuloyo mgwaqo noma ke letijubako kulo mgwaqo lomkhulu ngakho ke asiniketane ke wona emathuba kanti lapha endasi edolobheni lakuMathapa solo zivaliwe isitaladi sethu lesihamba lapha ngendasi kweStar Paint lekwenda ke ukuthi imotolo isebenzise nasi yasitaladi lesisuka eCTA lesenyukako sibheka khona lapha eTulu ukuthi utibane temgwaqo lethi lapha eBeverages noma ke nawubuka yona iGulf kanjalo ke nesitaladi lesisebenzisako ngiso lesiqonzile lesisuka elisoshwana siye kuthi tiba netemgwaco leti lapha e-beverages kungaba kukhutsata nje bashayeli ukuthi na uhamba ngalesitaladi lesisuka lapha eLesushwana utawujika ujikele khona e-CTA kubeke kweliphawu lokuselikhona-ke namuhla lolu sigcina senqele kulandzela kokuthi kushintshwe le midwebo yaphansi lapha timotolo setingena ngelayini linye kubheka khona lapha e-CTA noma-ke kwehla uya lapha endasi FNB bese-ke tenyuka ngemalayini lamabili noko-ke kudwetshiwe kuyacaca nje-ke nje awubashayeli abakuhloniphe lokho kwentela kokuthi mhlambe kuphefumulise noma-ke leso timoto lesibonakala-ko ukuthi phuma ekhathi edolobheni lakhona lapha kumathapha kanti kamanzini nakhona solo sivaliwe nasi yasitaladi lesisuka lapha e-Central lesenyewelela lapha ngesheya lapha ekhathi ye-bus rank lesingu-Main Street siyawusebenzisa-ke nasi yasitaladi lesihamba lapha etibaneni temgwaqo sehlele khona lapha endasi kunaya national space lesikhona lapha endasi kanti-ke nawuqhamuka ovelehele umgwaqo wethu solo uyalungiswa lapha umzila longesenqele indzaweni letilithandana nje-ke la sibona-ke timotolo letihamba ngemzila wasekudla kuphela kwatise ukuthi lo longesenqele umgwaqo uhambe ube netigatshana lapho ulungiswa khona kanti edolobheni lasesiteki nakhona lapha nawusuka khona lapha e-Good Shepherd ubheka khona edolobheni nakuloyo mgwaqo loyo solo kuyalungiswa etulu kugege awusolo kugijima bona bugandaganda netincola letinkulu lapha ku-MR13 lekungumgwaqo losuka lapha emagubheleni ubheke khona lapha kubogege kuposicunuza sithi nje awube kunena sicaphele tinfuli akusito tonke tindzawo lapho basinyenyeta khona kepha-ke wena mshayeli yenda siqiniseko sokuthi-ke nawe usoma ngetinyawo awungeni ekhathi nekhathi nathi tinfuli uyatimela tihlale phasi wendele kokuthi ukhona kubona ngendlela leyo bangileyo lephephile lapha etulu kahoho na uqhamuka khona kumathamo uta edolobheni lasesipiki ulungisiwe umgwaqo kepha-ke usede imithwebo yaphansi nakhona siyasikhutsata sive ukuthi awube kunene asishayele ngaloku kukhulu ukucophelela umthamo wetimoto lo sowuphakeme emgwaqweni nelinanda labona abahamba ngetinyawo sithi nje awube kunene asikhumbule kulandzela umthetho asikhumbule kuhlonipha timpawu temgwaqo nekuhloniphana nje thina sisodvwana sisawusebenzisa umgwaqo siyabonga kakhulu mbukeli ngufisele ilanga lelihle naleliphephile usawusebenzisa umgwaqo siyabonga kakhulu.
I do the most. Watch local TV on the go with the Eswatini TV app for only 20 emalangeni. Come on. Do the most with Eswatini TV app. Download from Google Play Store or App Store.
We're good together. Everywhere you go, MTN.
Secretary Granholm, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Of course.
And let's start with the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And you know that Russian troops seized control of this power plant, biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, in the few first days of the war. Ukraine, after the recent reports of the shelling, Ukraine is calling for demilitarized zone around the plant and new sanctions against Russia for what President Zelensky called the nuclear blackmail. How worried are you about this situation and what the United States can do to help stabilize it?
Yeah, first, we agree with the demilitarization. There should not be military activities around a nuclear plant, period. It is extremely dangerous. We're monitoring the situation very closely. There are sensors that are in the region that our scientists are monitoring. We strongly condemn what Russia has done. We want them to turn the plant control back over to the Ukrainians. We are so grateful for the workers in the plant who have continued to operate it and continue to try to abide by rules of safety. But we want to have the International Atomic Energy Agency to have access so they can help with safety, they can monitor, they can make sure the protocols for safety are instilled. And that has not happened yet. So we call upon Russia needs to turn control back over to the Ukrainians, and we need to stop all military activity near the plant.
And you talked a little bit about the monitoring mission. What would be the successful monitoring mission? And do you Are you confident in its independence?
Well, I'm confident that the information that we are receiving through the monitors show at the moment no increase in radiation. So, but our concern is, of course, if there is continued military activity around the plant, we don't, if there is an increase in radiation, that is a huge problem. And, Russia knows this. They've been in the nuclear power business for a long time. And that it is just reckless and irresponsible what they are doing. So success is turn the plant back over to the Ukrainian authorities, make sure that we are continuously monitoring and do not see elevated signs of radiological contamination.
Are there any tools that international community can use in order to make Russian forces leave the plant? And if the power plant stays under Russian control, can anyone be sure that Europe will not see another nuclear catastrophe?
Well, clearly nobody wants to see that happen. There would be fallout that would, that could damage Russia as well. So they have to understand how serious this is. The United States obviously stands so strongly with Ukraine and will continue to support Ukraine with assistance. We support the demilitarization. Of course, President Biden has said no U.S. troops on the ground, but through our allies and with our own resources, we will continue to support Ukraine.
Even before the full-scale war, the experts were warning about Russia weaponization of energy.
Yes.
And they were calling on European leaders to diversify their sources of energy, to wind down the dependence of Russian energy. Now Europe is preparing for a very difficult winter. Do you think that European countries will be able to import enough gas from other sources, including the United States, to make up for the shortages?
Well, first of all, I think they have to have a multi-pronged strategy, which is why, diversification of their fuel sources is one of that. So both diversifying where they're getting the fuel from, but also diversifying into clean energy, right? To decarbonize their grid, to deploy clean, to also reduce their energy uses. And they are moving on all of those strategies. The United States, of course, the president has committed to sending more liquefied natural gas. We're working together with the Europeans on a number of technologies to be able to reduce their energy use and to generate clean energy. But honestly, this invasion by Russia is such an example of why countries need to move away from the volatility of fuels from countries who do not have our interests and from the volatility of fossil fuels. If we want to be energy secure and energy independent, that means we've got to produce our own energy. My counterpart in Ireland, the minister there, energy minister there, has said that no one has ever weaponized access to the sun. No one has ever weaponized the wind. Perhaps a move to clean energy will be the greatest peace plan the world has ever known.
So in short term, it's more production, and then in the long term, it's moving to renewables,
yes,
right?
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, this has demonstrated, you're seeing how the prices of fuel go through the roof in Europe. Obviously, the invasion pulled a number, millions of barrels offline of Russian exports of oil, in addition to natural gas. So the prices all around the world went up. Now, our president and others have called for increase in production right now so that we can alleviate the prices at the gas pump for consumers. And this president is definitely concerned about how that impacts real people, inflation, et cetera. But ultimately, we've got to move to clean. And that's what the bill that the president signed yesterday for the United States, it is the largest commitment to combating climate change of any country in the world. By 10, it is the largest bill that we've ever passed in the United States to combat climate change. So it is so important for our energy security, and I know our European allies are trying to do the same.
Will it be a difficult winter for Europe?
I think it will be. I think it will be.
How confident are you that European countries will not crack under the Russian energy pressure and will not ease sanctions on Russia right when they just start showing their effect?
Yeah, I think that the allies, the NATO allies, the Europeans are so strong together in seeing what this aggression by Russia has done to them, that they are not going to go back, that we have to wean ourselves off of Russian fuels or off of fuels in general that come from countries who don't share our values. So I think we are united. It's going to be hard. There's no doubt it's going to be an expensive winter. I know that the European leaders are looking for how they can alleviate the pain for real people and spend in these increases in prices. But I know ultimately they are determined to move away from Russian fuels and toward clean energy.
So there is no way back, and we're not going to see
there is no way back.
Nord Stream 2 renew its function?
From all of the leaders that I've talked to, my counterparts in the EU, they are determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past.
And of course, Ukraine is also trying to secure natural gas imports to heat homes in Ukraine this winter. And one of the ideas that Ukrainian leaders said they proposed to Washington is so-called gas lend-lease. So they're saying that they're asking the United States to provide the LNG through Europe, for which Ukraine will repay later. Do you have any comments on such an idea, and are there any other ways that United States and allies can help Ukraine to secure its needs this winter?
Yeah, this is a really important question about how we increase supply that will help to alleviate the pressure. Right now, in terms of the terminals that we have, we are liquefying every molecule of natural gas that there is with the terminals we have. They are at full capacity. As you know, from an infrastructure point of view, it takes time to add more. I know Norway is increasing their commitments as well. I know there is exploration with other countries to be able to increase. And whether it's for Ukraine, and I know Ukraine is looking at diversifying and decarbonizing and deploying clean energy as well. All of that has to happen. Of course, it's so much more difficult for Ukraine right now in the middle of this crisis, which is why I think all ideas should be on the table. I don't have an answer for you with respect to the land lease issue, but I do know that this administration is game to look at whatever it can do to help alleviate the pain in Ukraine.
Where do you see the future of U.S.-Ukraine cooperation in energy sector? Is it going to be more focused on renewables or something else?
I mean, it's hard to say at this moment, because one of the conversations we've been having is small modular nuclear reactors, right? But with what's happening in Zaporizhia, there might be some concern about that. This conflict has to end, I think, before we make a decision about nuclear, but definitely we can cooperate and will be cooperating on clean. And, I've had a lot of conversations with Herman Halushenko, who is my counterpart in Ukraine, the energy minister. They absolutely want to move in this direction. There's other types of technology that they're very interested in too, like clean hydrogen, for example. Certainly offshore wind, if the offshore component is available to them. There's just a lot. Obviously, solar is an obvious. Batteries for energy storage, for renewable energy storage. Lots of technologies that we've been talking about, and that once this conflict ends, and it will end, and we expect that it will end in a way that has Ukraine independent and safe. We look forward to continued cooperation in energy.
A year ago, you led the United States delegation to Ukraine to celebrate its 30th anniversary of independence. This year, August 24th, will also mark the 6 months since Russia started the full-scale invasion. After the 6 months, what is the main takeaway for you in terms of Western response to this war? And do you think that there are some lessons that world leaders should learn?
First of all, I am still so moved by how beautiful Ukraine was, but in the celebration there was a parade where President Zelensky had a young girl go through the streets of Kyiv, stopping at each of the points of history. It was so beautiful. There wasn't a dry eye in the viewing stands. It just made me so, I'm not Ukrainian, but it made me so proud of Ukraine and the fierce independence and sense of identity that Ukraine has, and the fierce sense of independence. I was there for the summit on Crimea, as well as the 30th anniversary. I would never have guessed that 6 months later, this horror would be happening. And I think, yes, there are lessons. I mean, and one of the biggest lessons for the world is, I mean, first of all, it's clear what Russia's intentions are, but it's also clear that NATO and our allies must remain strong in defense of countries who want to protect their freedom. And that's why we are so, I worry that Russia sees this as a schism in the world, that there is a cleaving of countries right now as a result of what they have done. And that is their action. It is not what anybody wants to see, but it is what has been created. Fortunately, there are a lot more countries who stand with Ukraine and who feel so strongly that we have to stand together when the sovereignty of our allies are attacked. So that's number one. And number two, I think it really speaks volumes, because I'm the energy secretary, of how much we have to move and how rapidly we have to move to energy security through clean energy.
Secretary Granholm, just to end this, is there something that you want Ukrainian people to know? Some people will have very tough winter. They're already going through a lot of difficulties. Is there something as a Secretary of Energy that you want them to know from the United States?
I do want them to know that the United States is so strongly supportive of Ukraine, and we will continue to be supportive. Whether it is in energy, I mean, we have been working with the synchronization with the European grid, for example. We will continue to do that. Whether it's in monitoring and ensuring that what we can do to make sure that the Zaporizhia plant is safe and the area around it and the citizens around it are safe. Whether it is ensuring that Ukraine feels like they have the resources necessary to carry their defense forward. And that this is a friendship that will last. So we will never turn our back on Ukraine.
Pay your TV license quickly and easily with MTN Momo. Simply dial *007 *3 hash and select option 8 for TV license. Enter your national ID number as your reference and the amount you wish to pay. Then enter your PIN to confirm your payment. Once your payment has been made, you'll receive a confirmation SMS of your payment. If you're a first-time payer, you get another SMS for your TV license. So legalize your entertainment from the comfort of your home. Pay your TV license the easy and convenient way with MTN Momo.
Everywhere you go, MTN.
Afghanistan, 1 year later. What's happened since American troops pulled out and the Taliban poured in? Eyewitness accounts of the day Kabul fell. Millions of Afghans turned refugees, but where did they go? Plus, the raid that killed Al-Qaeda's top terrorist. What's next? Now, on The Inside Story, Afghanistan, 1 year later.
Hi, I'm Anita Powell, VOA White House correspondent. 1 year ago this week, Taliban fighters re-entered Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. It had been nearly 20 years since Taliban were driven from power by U.S. bombs and troops who were hunting the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks and those who harbored them. The Taliban's return to power came as the final American troops were leaving the country after President Joe Biden announced a complete U.S. withdrawal by the end of last August. We all remember the chilling images of desperate Afghans trying to climb the fences at the Kabul airport, some even holding on to airplanes taking off. This week, we will look at what has changed for those remaining in Afghanistan, look at some of the lives of those who left, and hear recollections of what it was like to live through the fall of Kabul. We'll start with unheard voices. Girls and women in Afghanistan who, once again, have seen rights and privileges taken away since the Taliban regained power 1 year ago. Despite promises by the Biden administration for the protection of human rights, the quality of life for women in Afghanistan continues to steadily decline. In the years since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, women and girls have seen their rights degrade dramatically, despite what the White House says are their constant efforts to pressure the Islamist group. During the chaotic withdrawal last year, the White House touted their influence over the group.
We have an enormous amount of leverage, this is our view, over time. That includes economic leverage, it includes leverage that we will make clear to the Taliban as it relates to coordination to continue to get American citizens and our partners out.
But since taking power last August, the hardline group has prevented most girls from going to school, forcing them into secret schools. And they've ordered women to cover their faces and stopped issuing driver's licenses to women. The group pegs these edicts to their strict interpretation of Islam. The U.S. pressure is not enough, say advocates.
It's basically been, a leverage that has not worked, frankly, it's sort of it's essentially time that we acknowledge that. There's also sort of the question of diplomatic recognition, but that's a question that's sort of far down the road. I mean, the question of the other kinds of aid, the question of, the unfreezing of the central bank reserves, all of those questions sort of come first. And even that is leverage that essentially has not worked.
The U.S. isn't the only nation speaking out for Afghan women. Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, have also tried, again, with no effect. And analysts say the sanctioning of the Taliban has led to a humanitarian crisis that disproportionately hurts women and children, and could threaten the main U.S. priority for Afghanistan, which is to prevent it from becoming a terrorist haven again.
I think that many in Afghanistan would blame the United States to an extent for the current state of affairs of the humanitarian crisis, in that, it's the U.S. that led these efforts to sanction the Taliban many years ago. The sanctions are still there. And it's mainly because of those sanctions that you're not having money coming into the country. And because money's not coming into the country, that's a big reason for the economic crisis.
And what do the women of Afghanistan want?
We want to live as human beings, as humans, and not as captives in the corner of the house, not be held in a cage, and our husbands go and beg for food. We don't ever want this.
But for Afghanistan's 19 million girls and women, this demand is being denied. The anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal was celebrated in Kabul, with Taliban fighters brandishing flags and guns in the streets as supporters marched past the shuttered U.S. embassy chanting, "Long live Islam" and "Death to America." So how did we get here? VOA's Aisha Tanzim takes us through the past 12 months in Afghanistan.
On August 15, 2021, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The government collapsed and the Taliban took control of Kabul. The speed of the Taliban's victory shocked the world and threw U.S. evacuation plans into disarray.
This did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
Thousands of Afghans rushed to the airport, with chaos erupting as they tried to flee. On August 17, the new leaders tried to present a face different than their last time in power. They promised Afghanistan would not be used to attack other countries as it had been in September 2001, and vowed to protect women's right to work and study under the framework of Islam. On August 26, an attack by the Islamic State of Khorasan province, ISIS-K, outside the airport killed 170 civilians and 13 U.S. security personnel. On August 31st, the last US forces left Afghanistan, bringing an end to a 20-year war. The US spent more than $2 trillion, lost more than 6,000 service members and contractors. Thousands of people who assisted the US over the years remain trapped inside Afghanistan.
We've worked intensely to evacuate and relocate Afghans.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken promised that the US would work to evacuate them.
We've gotten many out.
In the first weeks of Taliban rule, many Afghan women protested, demanding equal rights. On September 7, the Taliban announced a new caretaker government. Mohammad Hassan Akhund, on a US sanctions list, was chosen to head the government. Sirajuddin Haqqani, on the FBI's most wanted list, was named the Interior Minister. There was no mention of the Women's Ministry, a department responsible for women's rights and advancement before the new Taliban rule. With the exit of the international community, humanitarian aid dried up, and Afghanistan's food crisis worsened. Combined with the US freeze on the Afghan Central Bank's assets, worth $9.5 billion, the Afghan economy plunged into free fall.
Si on veut que l'Afghanistan ne soit pas un centre de terrorisme.
On September 13, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that poverty and hunger were spiraling out of control and appealed to the world community for help. On September 24, the US paved the way for sending aid to Afghanistan by allowing limited engagement with the Taliban. Despite promises to protect women's rights, on December 26, the Taliban banned women from traveling alone for more than 72 kilometers without a male companion. On March 23, 2022, the Taliban said girls' high schools would remain closed until they could be opened in accordance with Islamic law. On May 7, the Taliban ordered women to wear the head-to-toe burqa in public. On May 19, the Taliban said that female TV presenters should cover their faces. On June 22, a major earthquake killed over 1,000 people in the country's southeast. UNAMA, we are deeply concerned about the apparent impunity with which human rights violations have been carried out to date. On July 20, a UN report estimated that about 60% of the population needed humanitarian assistance. The report also accused the new government of human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings, torture, and illegal detentions. It found the most notable aspect of Taliban's rule was the erosion of women's rights. By mid-2022, some 79,000 Afghan refugees have been settled in the US since the Taliban came to power. Thousands more wait outside the US for their paperwork to be processed. On the morning of July 31st, Al-Qaeda's top leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed in a US drone strike in Kabul. Even after a year, not a single country has formally recognized the Taliban government.
Let's go a bit deeper into one of those recent events on the timeline, the US-directed killing of al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. When he announced the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, President Biden vowed the US would maintain what's called over-the-horizon operations to prevent al-Qaeda and other terror organizations from finding refuge in Afghanistan. The White House acknowledges cutting off the head of the beast may not neutralize the threat. The White House says it has high confidence that its targeted strike killed al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri.
We have eliminated the emir of al-Qaeda.
But the White House also says cutting off the head of the beast may not neutralize the threat.
They're in North Africa, they're in the Sahel, they're throughout the Middle East, and they're in Yemen. I get that we're focused on Afghanistan right now, but we're not taking our eye off the rest of the world either.
Since Osama bin Laden formed the group in 1988, al-Qaeda has sprouted numerous offshoots, united over the decades by intolerance, hatred of the US and Israel, and a strict interpretation of Islam.
Al-Qaeda may not be actively, operationally planning an attack on U.S. soil, but ideologically, it remains, ideologically opposed to the U.S. So, that very fact is something that we shouldn't overlook.
Especially in Africa, where affiliates have flourished.
My advice to Biden and to the American government is that, yes, okay, we can kill the leadership, but I think it's a very tiny aspect of the fight against terrorism. The focus should actually be on addressing, the factors, the political and economic factors that actually shield terrorism, or which actually give oxygen, to terrorism around the world.
But al-Zawahiri's death will affect these groups. Although he was not a charismatic leader like bin Laden, he was a disciplined one.
Zawahiri was effective in kind of keeping this broader network of affiliates, franchise groups, and branches together, from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa and further afield. That's probably what he should get the most credit for, is maintaining that alliance and doing it through the turbulent period of the Arab Spring and the rise of the Islamic State.
So what now? On that, the president was clear.
My administration will continue to vigilantly monitor and address threats from al-Qaeda, no matter where they emanate from.
Analysts also urged patience.
These groups are patient and they're highly capable. And so to dismiss them as kind of a nuisance or a has-been, and I know everybody wants to focus on great power competition with Russia and China and kind of leave behind the global war on terrorism, I would say, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center the first time in 1993, killing 6 people. At the time, they were a relatively obscure group, until September 11th, 2001.
د 15 د اګوست په افغانستان کې او ما د طالبانو راتګ په سترګو لیدلی. شبنم سالیم د افغانستان د بشر د حقوقو خپلواک کمیسیون د ښځو د برخې کمیشنر د کابل پوهنتون استاده. 11 بجې شاوخوا زموږ د امنیت مسؤل رادننه سو او راته ویل چې کمیشنر صاحب که دفتر پرېږدي ښه به وي. زه رالم ډرایور و محافظ سره له کمیسیون راووتم. داسې ځای کې م رارسېدلی تر 10 متره مخکې 15 متره مخکې هم طالبان را سړک ته راغلي دي او سپین بیرغ یې پورته کړی ده او زما موټر یو دولتي موټر و. په موټر کې ډرایور راته وایي چې ښه ده چې له دې موټره کته چې له دې خطر چې دا موټر په خپله یو د خطر زنګ ده. په داسې یو وضعیت کې مور مې ډېره زیاته سخته اندېښنه او د غونې بې زنګ راته زویه چېرته راورسېدې او ما به ورته چې مورې هلته چې وم هلته یم ښه خو یې شاوخوا خو څوک نشته خطر خو به نه وي درته. بیا چې به مې اخر ورته نه مورې ولا هېڅ هم نشته. بیا ورته قسم راته وخوره چې ته خو ښه یې هله زر راسه کور ته. دا اخري وال ما ورته مال مورې زه تلیفون ګل کوم. د استاد مې راته میسج وکړو چې تلیفون دې ګل که زه شاید د تلیفون له طریقه ته ټرک سي او پیدا سي شاید ما دغه اخري خبرې دغه خبره مې زه احساس کوم چې د ژوند تر ټولو هغه سخت خبره چې ما مور ته کړې کور ته چې رالم زه مې حنا راسره کړې چې انا مې راته چیغه کړه او ما چیغه کړه او داسې احساس مې وکړو چې نور ژوند ختم ده او موږ هر څه بایللي. په 23 یعنی 3 ورځې متواتر موږ د میدان بېلابېلې لارې وکتلې بېلابېل دروازو ته ولاړو ولې موافق نسو چې دننه سو میدان ته. له 10 ساعتونو وروسته موږ په دې بریالي سو میدان ته داخل سو. شپې 8 بجې زموږ پرواز آماده سو او پرواز هم که پوهېږم نه چې کومې خواته ځو. تر هغه وخته پورې ما ته خپل منزل معلوم نه زه کومې خواته ځم. زه باوجود دې چې ایواکویشن لیټر لرم له 4 هېوادونو نه ولې زه نه پوهېږم زه کومې خواته ځم. تیارې کې خلک ژاړي او هر چا له چا خاوره له ځان سره راخسي څوک د وطن یاد کوي. البانیا ته ورسېدو. البانیا د شرقي اروپا یو هېواد ده او ما داسې احساس وکړو چې نور خو هر څه لاس ولاړو او هېڅ نه لرو او زه نور بېکوره سوم او نور زه بیرته د وطن ته د تګ بله لهر نه لرم. اکتوبر 14 د تېر کال د 2020 کال زه کانادا ته رالم.
من نگین خلیلی هستم. رئیس بودم در بخش منع و آزار اذیت زنان در روی سارنمولی. روزی که طالبان در افغانستان آمدن 15 آگوست به دفتر بودم.
ساعت 11:30 بود که دیدم همه همکارای ما همه در حال فرار بودن. همکارم داخل دروازه شد و برام گفت که فرار کو، به خاطر که طالبا به کوت سنگی رسیدن و قرار است که همه جا را بگیرن. حیران بودم کجا برم و چی باید بکنم. تصمیم گرفتم که دفتر رها کنم و طرف خانه برم. دیدم که نمیشه، باید پیاده شوم. از موتر پیاده شدم، بوتایم بلند بود و دیدم که همگی میدون. برام یکی گفت که چادری بپوش که نشناسند. من چند تا مردا، بچه ها و همینطور کسای کلانسن بودن. من لباس دفتریم جانم بود و چادر و امو حجابات که در افغانستان قابل مراعات بود او را مراعات هم کرده بودم. و وقت اونا مرا دید بر من گفت که خوب شد کشور سقوط کرد و این از خاطر شما زناست. همان شب مطمئن هستم هیچ کسی در افغانستان نخوابید. هیچ کس جرأت نمیکرد موسیقی بشنوه. تمامی اسناد و مدارک که به زبان انگلیسی داشتیم یا از کارهای ما بود خواستم او را از بین ببرم و اگر اتفاق شنیده بودیم که خانار تلاشی میکنن. یادم است که همون روز تاریخ 15 آگوست طرفای دیگر بود که برام یک زنگ آمد و زنگ کسی بود که من سارنوالش بودم، قبلا تحقیقش کرده بودم. برام زنگ زد گفت ما آزاد شدیم و پیدایت میکنم. تهدیدمان کرد، یعنی که وقت پیدایتان کردیم دیگه زنده نخواهد ماندین. و تاریخی که قرار بود ما بسها را ترک کنیم به مقصد میدان هوایی، به همونجا چند تا از عساکر طالبان هم بودن و اونا گفتن عیب که ما شما را پیش ندیده بودیم. یعنی منظورشان این است که اگر ما شما را قبلا میدیدیم میکشتیمتان. تصمیم بسیار سخت بود که بخوایم کشورم ترک کنم. در یک دوراهی مانده بودم بین رفتن و ماندن. ولی وقت وضعیت را دیدم و تهدیدایی که متوجه من بود مجبور بری شدم که باید کشور را ترک کنم. داخل میدان شدیم، ساعت 4 صبح بود. منتظر بودیم که شاید پرواز شود. آفتاب بی نهایت سوزان و گرم بود. از طرف دیگه اطفال که بسیار گریه میکردن و میخواستن خانه باشن. مادرهایی را دیدم که خانمهایی که حتی حمل داشتن، باردار بودن و حتی چند تایشان که زمان حملشان فرا رسیده بود که باید طفلشان تولد شود اونجا بودن. سخت است که هیچ کار ندانی و مجبور شوی که کشورت و مردمت ترک کنی و رای جز فرار نداشته باشی. رایی که فقط باید به یک آینده که بر دیگران شاید خوب باشه و بتونن زندگی خوب داشته باشن.
There are more than 2.5 million Afghan refugees, according to the United Nations. More than 1 million of them fled to Pakistan, where life running from the Taliban becomes more difficult without proper documentation. From Islamabad, VOA's Malik Bakar Ahmed shows us the challenges the refugees face.
17-year-old Benazir Akhtari is teaching kids in a roadside tent in Islamabad, Pakistan. Like her, these kids don't have many opportunities to get a formal education.
I came to Pakistan full of hope, thinking that I would continue my education here. For 6 months, I knocked on the door of every school. None would take me because I don't have a POR card.
Akhtari is just one of roughly 250,000 Afghans who fled to Pakistan last year. Once in the country, Afghan refugees can receive a proof of registration card or POR, which allows them to live in Pakistan legally. The card is issued by the Pakistan government in coordination with the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR. Because so many refugees need the card, the wait can last a year or longer. And that is making life incredibly hard.
Getting a house for rent is very difficult. We can't get SIM cards for our phones. Any basic necessity is hard to get without this card.
Even before the Taliban takeover, nearly 3 million Afghan refugees lived in Pakistan. Many of them arrived in the 1980s, during the decade-long Afghan war between the Soviet Union and Afghan religious fighters known as the Mujahideen. Even some of these refugees from decades ago don't have official refugee status. Many of the newly arrived refugees say they want to move elsewhere, mostly to Europe or North America. Officials at the UNHCR say issuing the card takes time and effort.
When people arrive in such a huge number, it becomes very difficult to process them. We have increased our capacity, but we must interview and screen them properly, so it takes time.
Meanwhile, without the card, the refugees can't access even the most fundamental needs like healthcare.
Once I went to the hospital, but they wanted to see my documents. At the time, I had neither a refugee card nor a passport, so I couldn't get treated.
Akhtari wonders if her dream of becoming a doctor will be crushed as she waits to be legally recognized in Pakistan. For Malik Waqar Ahmed in Islamabad, Pakistan, Aisha Tanzim, VOA News.
Before we go, a taste of the bittersweet story of two Afghan sisters who aspire to be musicians. But Farida and Zohra Ahmadi were unable to escape with the rest of students at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. Symphony of Courage is a new VOA documentary that follows the girls on their journey to freedom. Here's a slice of the documentary.
When the Taliban reached the gates of Kabul, I began panicking. I began panicking for the lives of my students, my community. We all know that when the Taliban are in charge, they're going to steal music away from the life of the Afghan people.
Dr. Sarmas has brought together different ethnic groups from all across Afghanistan that have traditionally not gotten along to play music in harmony together in these ensembles. He gave them a life in music.
I do the most. Watch local TV on the go with the Eswatini TV app for only 20 Emalangeni. Come on. Do the most with Eswatini TV app. Download from Google Play Store or App Store. We're good together.
Everywhere you go, MTN.
A federal magistrate in West Palm Beach, Florida, on Thursday unsealed a document providing specifics about the Justice Department's criminal investigation into former President Donald Trump removing documents from the White House and storing them at his private club and residence, Mar-a-Lago. The crimes under investigation include willful retention of national defense information. One expert, who worked as a U.S. diplomat for 40 years, says she is alarmed by the national security threat posed by removing classified documents.
I mean, we don't know what the documents are yet. I can tell you I spent 26 years with a top secret security clearance, and most of those years I also had what's called an SCI clearance, a special compartmented information clearance. And those documents are really rare. And the fact that he walked out of the White House, it's not just that he walked out of the White House, it's he took him to Mar-a-Lago, where those documents, could have been accessed by almost anyone.
Trump denies any wrongdoing, and his supporters are calling the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago an outrage. Several Republican elected officials said the investigation makes the United States look like a banana republic. Here is a tweet from Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. But another expert tells VOA that democracies across the world have investigated and in some cases convicted and jailed former presidents and prime ministers without a great deal of fallout.
cycles of prosecutions in Latin America, for example, in Brazil, between various former presidents, as well as Nicolas Sarkozy in France, Jacob Zuma in South Africa, and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel.
But Long also points out that if Trump were indicted, it would be a first for the nation.
This really is uncharted territory for the United States. The last kind of time that the United States faced this issue was, of course, after Watergate with Richard Nixon. And at that time period, then President Ford decided to give a pardon for Nixon with the idea of kind of moving forward and moving on to heal the nation.
Trump's ongoing hold over the Republican Party and the polarized political climate make the United States different from other countries, says another expert.
You have a former president who controls a political party that constitutes one of the two main vehicles of political expression among political elites in our country, tethered to an individual who may well be indicted. At the same time, you have you have a gun problem here that you do not have in South Korea, you do not have in France, you do not have in Israel.
The White House has stated that President Joe Biden, a Democrat, only learned of the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago from media reports, and that the Justice Department conducts its investigations independently.
The White House faces constant pressure from more than 60 American families whose relatives are held hostage overseas, including one whose family is marking 10 years without him. Austin Tice has been missing in Syria since August 2012. He's been missing longer than any other American journalist. Syria's government denies holding him, which the State Department refutes. State Department spokesman Ned Price.
We believe, to this very day, that Syria still has the power to release Austin Tice. That is why we are calling on the Syrian regime to do just that.
But hostage situations are rarely straightforward and often escalate to the highest levels of government. Earlier this year, President Joe Biden's administration oversaw a prisoner swap for the release of Trevor Reed, a former Marine held since 2019 in Russia. Last month, after basketball star Brittany Griner appeared in a Russian court on drug charges, the administration refined its hostage policy, allowing agencies to impose sanctions and visa bans on both state and non-state actors who are holding Americans. Those campaigning to free Tice welcomed these changes and are calling on Biden to act. The leader of the campaign told VOA that the Syrian government, in a 2020 meeting with U.S. officials, indicated they are seeking a reduction in U.S. troops in Syria, sanctions relief, and limited diplomatic engagement in Washington and Damascus. Bill McCarran heads the Free Austin Tice campaign and also leads the National Press Club of Washington, D.C. He spoke to VOA on Zoom.
Now what needs to happen is an offer needs to be put on the table, and it is the United States that needs to do that. That is where the ball is right now.
But those who have worked in the West Wing say patience is essential. Philip Bobbitt, now a law professor, was working at the White House on January 20th, 1981. As President Ronald Reagan was being sworn in, and Iran's supreme leader released 52 U.S. hostages after 444 days.
The president has to have confidence in his negotiators. If he tries to jiggle their elbow to get the hostages back with more dramatic threats or with more dramatic concessions, he'll really, even if he succeeds in the instant case, make things more difficult for the United States when hostages are taken again in the future. So he has to find negotiators in whom he has confidence, give them a charter, and keep steadily to that.
But for families, this process can be excruciating and can still fail. Diane Foley learned that 8 years ago this week. Her son James, a journalist, had been kidnapped 9 months earlier in Syria by a militia group loyal to Syria's president. On August 19th, the captors released a chilling video showing Foley. He'd been decapitated. Foley's mother said she welcomed the changes that have been made since. She spoke to VOA as she prepared to travel to Virginia for the sentencing of one of the men convicted in her son's kidnapping and murder.
There's definitely been progress, Anita. I really feel there is. In 2015, the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell was created. The special envoy and the whole hostage enterprise. When Jim was in captivity, there was no such thing. So at least we have people accountable for the return of Americans. So there's definitely a heightened awareness at the highest levels of our government.
McCarran argues that the Foley family's path to justice shows that the U.S. government isn't playing a zero-sum game.
This is not a question of you can either get the hostage out or you can hold the person accountable by justice. You can do both things. You can do both things. And that's what I think the rigidity of the U.S. policy does not allow for.
But for the families of Greiner, Whelan, and dozens of other Americans held overseas, the request to the White House is constant, unwavering, and simple.
These young Afghans say it took them months to reach Germany. They are now living in a refugee camp in the city of Soest in northwestern Germany. They escaped the Taliban in Afghanistan after the group took power in August 2021. But here in Germany, they are facing a different issue. They say that they are treated differently than the Ukrainian refugees.
They have free public transportation, but we need tickets. They are given SIM cards for free national and international calls, but we do not have that privilege. About the camps, they are sent to the camps where they are happy, but our places are not livable.
The German Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community, however, told VOA in a written statement that under its Ukraine Residence Transition Ordinance and a decision by the Council of the European Union in March, Ukrainian refugees can receive residence permits that entitle the holders to pursue an economic activity and receive social benefits. Although the statement did not talk about the concerns raised by the Afghan refugees, it said that Germany grants equal protection to all people if the legal conditions for doing so are met. Ukrainian refugees are granted temporary protection as soon as they enter Germany or other European Union countries, but Afghan refugees have to go through the asylum process.
We are pleased that there is a temporary status which protects the Ukrainians. We would like this status to be granted to people from other war zones as well.
After Russia invaded Ukraine in February, more than 971,000 refugees from Ukraine fled to Germany, according to the United Nations. Meanwhile, thousands of Afghans escaping the Taliban entered Germany this past year. Sharifullah Aryubzai, who was a nurse in Afghanistan, says the Ukrainians and Afghans should be treated similarly.
There is no difference between them and us. Both should be treated similarly. There is war in their country, and there is war in our country as well.
Escaping the Taliban, these Afghans took a long and dangerous route to Germany, crossing many countries in the Middle East and Europe. According to the European Union laws, the country of entrance into Europe is usually responsible for dealing with the asylum seekers' application. Sadaqat Samsor, who entered Europe through Bulgaria, says he now might face deportation from Germany.
My own application has also been rejected, and I have been told that you should go to Bulgaria, but I do not want to.
Ruhullah Uriakhil, a former Afghan army soldier, has the same problem with the German government.
They should process our cases so we get our information soon. It has been 3 months and I don't know about my future.
For now, these Afghans are in a safer place, but they are not sure what the future holds for them.